Reproductive rights in America have been a hot topic for decades. Americans have found themselves aligned with either supporting a woman's right over her own body or a fetus's right to life. With the second wave of feminism, the feminist movement made legislative strides toward their cause. But as time has elapsed and the 21st century has come around, the tide has turned.
Our job is to do what is right, not what is easy.
Abortion would be criminalized in Alabama, made a felony in the way the law is written. It would punish doctors who perform them with up to 99 years in prison. The only exception would be if the mother's life were in danger.
They would have already outlawed the procedure.
I am pro-life.
Okay, so what? Okay, so 20.
How did we get here? Although as we stand a nation divided over this controversial issue, the controversy is not new. Abortion and women's rights in the United States have long been a cause of concern and debate for both sides of the aisle. Before the feminist movement in the mid to late 20th century, there was minimal legislation that benefited women, but then they caught their first big break in 1972. The state of Connecticut, in an 1879 law, outlawed the use of contraceptives. The law stated, quote, any person who uses any drug, medicinal article, or instrument for the purposes of preventing conception shall be fined not less than $40 or imprisoned not less than 60 days. And any person who assists, abets, counsels, causes, hires, or commands another to commit any offense may be prosecuted and punished as if they were the principal offender. Connecticut Planned Parenthood Executive Director Estelle Griswold and Yale Medical School doctor and Professor Dr. C. Lee Buxton were arrested and convicted as accessories to giving illegal contraception. Arguing that the law violated the Constitution, the two women appealed to the Supreme Court of Errors of Connecticut and later the United States Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled 7-2 that Connecticut's ban on contraceptives infringed upon the right to marital privacy. The ruling later expanded in 1972, deeming that all women, not just married couples, had the right to use contraception. Later in 1972, William Byrd provided contraceptive foam to an unmarried woman, violating Massachusetts state legislature. In a friend of the court brief, the ACLU managed to get the Supreme Court to rule against the Massachusetts law that limited contraceptives exclusively to prescribed married couples. This case instituted the right to use contraceptives without regard to one's marital status. If the last two rulings were baby steps for the pro-choice movement, they truly struck gold with the 1973 Supreme Court ruling of Roe v. Wade. Norma McCorvey, under the alias Jane Roe, made a federal action against Dallas County District Attorney Henry Wade. She stated that it was the fundamental right of women to be able to terminate a pregnancy at any point during a pregnancy without state regulation. The Supreme Court rejected this notion, stating that, quote, compelling state interest can limit the, quote, fundamental rights of women. It was determined that abortion before the end of the first trimester was legal. This was designated as the point of viability, as the fetus then has the capability of meaningful life outside the mother's womb. In conclusion, Roe v. Wade was a monumental legislative advance in that it provided women with the fundamental, quote, right to privacy, giving women the choice to abort. And so the battle over women's rights was over. It was won. The pro-choice movement had won. Roe v. Wade and abortion was now legal. Or so they thought. Almost immediately after the passing of Roe v. Wade, multiple challenges cropped up, starting with the 1976 Planned Parenthood of Central Missouri versus Danforth. In the spring of 1976, the Planned Parenthood of Central Missouri was ready to operate under the new law of the land, as mandated by Roe v. Wade a year prior. They were willing to perform abortions and protect women's rights, but under some new rules. Planned Parenthood of Central Missouri wanted to define, quote, viability as the stage of fetal development when the life of the unborn child may be continued indefinitely outside the womb by natural and artificial life support systems. They also wanted to require women to sign a consent form certifying she was not coerced, require written consent from the woman's spouse, require parental consent if the woman is younger than 18, require physicians to exercise professional care in preserving a fetus's life, declare an infant who survived an abortion attempt as a ward of the state, depriving mother and father of parental rights, and require reporting and record keeping for facilities and physicians that perform abortions. Just 1 year after Roe v. Wade had passed, new challenges and expectations were already cropping up to challenge the landmark case's reach and ability. The Supreme Court upheld 3 of these provisions, 1, 2, and 8. The 5 other provisions were deemed unconstitutional. Roe v. Wade was not a total knockout victory for pro-choicers. This was just the beginning of the battle.
The years following Roe v. Wade were characterized by active participation on both sides of the issue. Pro-life advocates were extremely vocal, yet one fact remained: abortion was legal. The turn of the 21st century brought with its new president and new legislation to limit Roe v. Wade's reach. In 2003, President Bush signed the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act, forbidding the actions of any doctor performing a partial birth unless the mother delivering the baby is in crucial conditions. A partial birth is when the fetus is purposefully terminated when it is partially delivered. The term of partial birth is one of a political term instead of a medical term. It was originally known as dilation and extraction, or DNX. The procedure consists of dilating the woman's cervix and then pulling out the fetus through the birth canal. They use this terminology of a partial birth to show the public the methods of abortion in order to grow in opposition to abortion.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.
The Unborn Victims of Violence Act was signed into law on April 1st, 2004. This act states that if any act of violence harms a woman and the fetus, the individual will be charged with 2 criminal offenses. This law explicitly states that abortion that is consented by the woman is not criminalized by this law. The ACLU argued this case before the Supreme Court on behalf of the New Hampshire clinics and physicians who brought this legal challenge. It stated that abortion restrictions must include protections for women's health. This case began after a New Hampshire law was enacted saying that doctors are required to delay a teenager's abortion until 48 hours after a parent was notified. This law prohibited the aid of doctors to a pregnant teenager in an emergency situation. The court decided that in these situations the law must be blocked and doctors have to assist the woman.
The 2016 presidential election was turbulent, partisan, and emotional. Many issues divided Americans apart by party affiliation, and the media amplified this divide even further. Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton and GOP nominee Donald Trump fought intensely against one another in their campaigns. On November 9th, Donald Trump proved victor and was elected as President of the United States. The election of a pro-life president raised concerns for reproductive rights and the security of Roe v. Wade. Trump declared that women who have an abortion should receive, quote, some form of punishment. He furthered his pro-life intentions by releasing a statement that doctors and practitioners involved in performing an abortion should receive punishment as well. This and other remarks about women sparked a strong opposition to his presidency.
I am pro-life.
Okay, so what? Okay, so 2015.
This is what a feminist looks like. This is what a feminist looks like.
Massive crowd of women marching behind me. This is the front line, and they're pretty amped.
In response to the presidential election of
Pro-life President Donald Trump
and Vice President Mike Pence in 2016, over 3 million people in the U.S. and worldwide assembled for the first ever Women's March. The march addressed, amongst many things, sexist and disrespectful remarks by Trump released during his campaign and the pro-life agenda of him and Pence. Many were concerned that Roe v. Wade would be overturned during his presidency. The march took place on the first day of Trump's presidency in January of 2017. Many people traveled into the hub of the event, Washington, D.C. Others assembled in cities across the country and in international countries as well. The march illustrated the legitimate threat to women's right to abortion and the opposition to this threat. The following 2 years, the Women's March has continued, including a variety of different missions such as the Black Lives Matter movement, immigrant rights, environmental justice, and LGBTQ rights.
My wife Karen, our daughter Charlotte, I'd like to welcome you all to Washington, D.C. for the 44th Annual March for Life.
Despite an overwhelming showing for support for women's rights and the pro-choice movement, people of an opposite viewpoint, those who denounced Planned Parenthood and abortions, had a march of their own. The March for Life has been a tradition held by pro-lifers for more than 4 decades, the first being in 1974. In 2019, pro-lifers organized in the nation's capital to reiterate their damning stance on abortion. This past year's march included a guest appearance from Vice President Mike Pence.
We're the Pences, and we're pro-life.
Those cheers are from a reported 100,000 people who attended the March for Life.
And so I have to tell you, this was one of the most joyful marches. It's happy. It's a happy march. You've sent me on many marches. This one is happy. And
what do you want to accomplish with this amazing turnout that you have?
Today marks the 46th annual March for Life. We marched to end the human rights abuse of abortion. We are here over 100,000 strong, primarily young people. We want to make a culture where abortion is unthinkable.
More recently, on April 2nd of 2019, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp signed the fetal heartbeat abortion law into effect. The law bans abortion past 6 weeks of pregnancy, and as this is when doctors can often detect a heartbeat. However, many women do not know they are pregnant by 6 weeks, thus limiting their reproductive options extensively.
The Ohio governor signing today what critics condemn as the most restrictive abortion law in the country, and what supporters celebrate as a victory, one certain to be challenged in court.
In Ohio, Governor Mike DeWine signed a 6-week abortion ban into law on April of 2019. Like Georgia, this law bans a woman from getting an abortion past 6 weeks of her pregnancy. The bill offers an exception if the mother's life is at risk. However, pregnancies due to rape or incest must be carried to term.
I want to ask you, Kate, about some reporting you did out of this very disturbing case in Ohio. You write that an 11-year-old girl there was allegedly raped. She is now pregnant, and under a new abortion law there, victims will not have the option of terminating a pregnancy. What more can you tell us about this law?
So in Ohio, they recently passed, like we were just saying, a heartbeat bill. So that means once a fetal heartbeat is detected, a woman no longer has a choice of whether or not to have an abortion.
Alabama Governor Kay Ivey signed a near-total ban on abortion on May 15, 2019. This is the most restrictive ban on abortion since the 1973 Roe v. Wade case legalized abortion. The Human Life Protection Act bans all abortions unless one is necessary to prevent a serious health risk. Performed abortions are classified as a Class A felony, punishable with up to 99 years in prison. Attempted abortion is categorized as a Class C felony. No exceptions are made for either rape or incest.
Abortion bill in the country. The bill passed the state Senate last night. It outlaws abortion at every stage of pregnancy with exemptions for serious health risks, but not for rape or incest. Doctors who perform an abortion could face 99 years in prison. Critics of the bill point out that's the same or even less time than a convicted rapist. And if they even attempted, a doctor could be locked up for 10 years. That is significant, but as I touched on, there's the bigger picture, what it could mean for the fate of Roe v. Wade.
On May 24, 2019, Missouri Governor Mike Parsons signed a bill into law that outlawed abortions past 8 weeks of pregnancy. Following the pro-life wave of legislation, this law restricts abortion after 8 weeks when many women still are unaware of their pregnancy. As with previous anti-abortion laws, this Missouri law does not make any exceptions for rape or incest.
The unborn deserves a up and down vote, that right yet to live. And that's what we should be all doing, and that's what we're dedicated to do. That's why it's important for this legislation to get done. It's important for this legislation to get done right now. And we're until 6 o'clock on Friday. I really believe this legislation will get done because I believe it is the will of the people, and the people's voices will be heard.
These pro-life laws are a result of years of opposition to the pro-choice movement. For years, the gap between right and left has been widening further and further. The fight over reproductive rights has become polarized by party rather than by logic. For those who want to decrease abortion rates, are abortion bans the most effective method? Preventative methods such as sex education and access to contraceptives for both male and females have been suggested as effective ways of preventing unwanted pregnancies. The passage of these new pro-life laws will likely face federal opposition in which Roe v. Wade could be reevaluated. Some Americans see this rise in pro-life movement as a positive movement, while others are afraid we are moving back in American history. Where do you stand, and what will you do?